Good evening, everybody. I'm Jason, and welcome to tonight's class, First Steps in Catholic Occultism. Yes, I know that on Facebook I called it Catholic Occultism 101, but I like the new name better because, well, it sounds cooler. So, if you like it, awesome. If you don't, deal with it. I don't care. Okay, so this was kind of an interesting idea for a class. I did do a different version of this class before, like a few years ago, but I'd like to change it up a bit. I'd also like to present some material that's coming in my upcoming book, which, whenever I get that done, because I have so much material for the book, but the problem is there's so much, I have no idea how to organize it. So I'm hoping that teaching this class will help me to do that. And I'm also hoping that teaching this class will help you, because there's so much new stuff that's in here. Some of it's new, some of it's really well documented, that it may help in putting together a practice, it may help in putting together a system, it may help putting together a spiritual path. So with that said, I'm just going to jump right into this. What is Catholic occultism? Well, I'm guessing you all know what Catholicism is, so I probably don't have to explain that to you. But occultism, it means hidden, dealing with hidden things, generally hidden spiritual things. And not necessarily spiritual. For example, in Catholic moral theology, there's a distinction between the external form, which is what you do in public, what you do, say, and all that in public, and the occult form. The occult form is what you do in private, what your private thoughts are, what your private actions are, and what your private words are. And there's a distinction made, like how to deal with a person who sins in the external form versus how to deal with a person who sins in the occult form, occasion for scandal, and all those types of things. So, with that being said, the word occult very much means hidden, secret, private. In this case, Catholic occultism refers to the quote-unquote hidden spiritual aspects of Catholicism. And the fact is, the reason we use the word hidden, because it's pretty well documented. Spiritual theology, ascetic theology, mystical theology. But it's hidden because the average believers hide this from themselves. The average believer, they're there to do what's called pay, pray, and obey. Now, if you look at psychologists James Fowler or Scott Peck, you'll find different models for stages of faith or stages of spirituality. I'm going to go with Peck's because his model is a lot simpler and easy to digest. It's 4 stages instead of 6. Okay, I see you nodding your head over there, so I know you know what I'm talking about. Awesome! Okay, stage 1 of this model, he calls lawlessness. Okay, it's called lawlessness because this is the person that they're only in it for themselves. This is lookout for number 1. I don't care about nothing. I don't care about no rules. We don't need no stinking rules, you know? It's like miscreants, degenerates. Pick your label here. This is what stage 1 is. There's no spirituality. There's no set of rules. And there's really no caring about it. I'm just in it for myself and screw you. Well, what happens, now you could look at this either as a linear progression, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you could look at this as an alignment chart. Me, I'm not really sure because I could see both models here. But from stage 1 is stage 2. Now stage 2, trying to remember exactly what he calls this, but this is where a person sees their religion as literal. God is literally an old man in the sky throwing thunderbolts, striking down sinners. It's very centered on following rules. It's very centered on not wanting to run afoul of one's community. It's very centered on not wanting to engage deeper levels of faith. Now, I've been told that many conversions in prison end up going from lawless to this stage. But stage 1 to stage 2, but most people that are in churches, the average rank and file pew sitters, as you've heard me call them before, they tend to fit in this category. Pay, pray, and obey. I want to listen to what my pastor tells me. I want to listen to what my hierarchy tells me. I'm not interested in any other ideas, and any other ideas scare me so much that I must brand them as blasphemy or heresy or insert insult here. Now, from this stage, this goes to the skeptical stage, stage 3. The skeptical stage is where the person starts questioning their faith. A lot of times, people in this stage are said to become atheists. Now, I'm going from Peck's model. I don't 100% agree with it. But they're said to become atheists, or they just become rational questioners. Like, maybe they engage a scholastic tradition really close. I know my phase, I almost became an atheist. I wrote a blog post about it. When I post the video, I may or may not link it in the description. I'll see how I feel when I post it. But it's because they're looking for rational answers. They're looking for actual answers that have substance, as opposed to the things in stage 2 which are just saying, obey me, listen to me, don't question it, don't ask why, just do it. Or as the Catechism of the Catholic Church says in part 87, you are to hear and obey with docility the things that the hierarchy tells you. Yeah, I wrote in the Magic of Catholicism, I'm not that person. And if you're here, I don't expect you to be that person either. In fact, I hope to God you're not that person, because we're not going to get along. Now, from stage 3, there's a movement to stage 4. Now, some people, they stay in stage 3. Most people spend their entire lives in stage 2. But occasionally there's a movement to stage 4. Stage 4 is called mystic. Okay, he calls it mystic, which is where the person, they come back from their questioning stage. They're still questioning. They understand the scientific method. They understand the scholastic method and all that. But they've gotten into the point where they're engaging the spiritual content. They're engaging the deeper content of their faith. And they're realizing, hey, the answers that I was looking for have been here all along. It's very much like the movie version of Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy says, I don't need to look any further for adventure than my backyard, because if I don't find it there, then it isn't there at all. It's a lot like that in the mystical stage. Yes, it is inside my religion. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is to show that people are at different stages, and when you communicate with somebody, you gotta meet them where they're at. Now, I'd recommend just Googling stages of spirituality. In fact, I'll post a link to something about this in the description. But not everybody's in the same place. You can't treat everybody like they're in the same place. And if you do try to, like if you try to bring spiritual or mystical concepts to somebody who's just not ready for it, all you're going to do is make an enemy. So this is why when I call this occultism, and I mean that it's occult because people have occultated, i.e. hidden this from themselves. They have chosen to keep it hidden because they have chosen not to look for it, not to engage it. Now, occultism, Catholic occultism, it can be magical or spiritual. I was once told that a mystic tries to go to God directly, an occultist studies, and various powers are like side effects along the way. Now, I'm not sure how true that is, because what I see in my reading, what I see is that the two are so intertwined. It's like we could talk about the so-called Abramelin operation. It starts with morning and evening praying to God. It starts with seeking that union with God in order to seek that contact with your guardian angel. Right, we could talk about, I wrote a book, How to Pray the Rosary and Get Results. Really, the interconnection of mysticism and magic, it's so close. I really think the difference is one person is directly looking for so-called magic powers, while the other person isn't but runs into them anyway. That's what I think. But it can be magical or spiritual. So the question is, how do we distinguish Catholic occultism, as I'm using the term, from more generic, run-of-the-mill, esoteric Christianity? What I've seen is esoteric Christianity, it tends to be syncretic, in that the people who practice it, they seem to think that Christianity is incomplete, or it doesn't have enough. So we need to go and borrow concepts from Hinduism. We need to borrow concepts from Kabbalah. We need to borrow concepts from Buddhism. We need to borrow concepts from insert other religion here. Usually without a proper understanding of how these concepts work in the religions they're borrowing from. I mean, if I have any complaint about social justice warrior types, it's the constant whining about cultural appropriation. Largely because when you're saying that so much as like wearing a dress is a cultural appropriation, or if you're saying learning to speak Spanish so you can communicate with Spanish-speaking people is cultural appropriation, personally I think it's just being polite, meeting people where they are in whatever language they happen to speak. But when you're focusing on smaller things like that, it takes the gravity away from the term, so that when appropriation is really happening, like usurpation of the sacred, like when it's really happening, like if you're somebody like New Agers are borrowing from different religions without understanding the religions they're borrowing from, or without being respectful, that's real appropriation. That's exploitation. That's usurpation of the sacred. But when somebody is constantly crying wolf, who's going to listen when the more serious things happen? So yeah, that is a problem for me. And so-called esoteric Christianity, it is, I have a problem with it because of so much borrowing and so much New Ageism. Catholic occultism, on the other hand, it uses only what is within Catholicism without incorporating theological content from other religions. So this is not occult Catholicism plus occult Hinduism. This is not occult Catholicism plus occult Asatru. This is not occult Catholicism plus. This is just using what is inside the theological content that Catholicism has to offer. Ascetic theology, mystical theology, dogmatic theology, moral theology, scholastic theology, the whole ball of wax. And working with just that. Now, it is possible to borrow practices from other paths, but when doing so, do it sparingly, do it with full understanding of what you're doing, full understanding of the practice in context of the religion that's being borrowed from, and do it respectfully. This is something I'm going to get into when we talk about practices. So, enough with that tirade, but I just wanted to give the complete picture of what we're doing here. So, we talked about how it can be magical or spiritual. Let's look at that word magic, because magic encompasses a lot of what I talk about. What is magic? Well, first, is it spelled magic or magic? Some people will spell it with the K, I'll spell it without the K. In fact, I over-exaggerate it when speaking just to show that that's what I'm talking about. Not as an insult, but just to show. So, I don't use the K, and I'm going to talk about 3 reasons I don't use it. Alright, one thing that people bring up is the historical spelling. I saw a textbook like 14 years ago that referred to this as the Saxon K. I have not found that independently verified anywhere else, so I'm not going to refer to it. However, there are older texts where you will find it spelled with the K. Robert Turner's translation of the Isagoge of Arbitel, for example. Okay, this uses the K spelling. Now, you also find like public spelled P-U-B-L-I-C-K. So, the CK type of spelling, it has seen use. It is found in older forms of the English language. Well, my response to that is, I am committed to modern American spelling. I am an American. I am an American. I am a modern person, much as I don't care for modernity. So, I'm not going to use the K spelling just because it's an older spelling, any more than I'm going to say thee or thou in regular conversation. Another thing people bring up is, well, Aleister Crowley came up with this in order to differentiate real magic, i.e. occult magic, from stage magic or illusionism. Okay, I can understand his reasoning behind that, but I can't see his reasoning as valid because we're talking about occult magic. Occult is hidden. So to me, the idea is to keep it hidden. You're staying hidden from the normies. If you're going to put an alternate spelling in order to lampshade that, hey guys, I'm here, you're defeating the purpose. So to me, I'm not really seeing a reason to use a K spelling and to lampshade when people should be seeking this out on their own without some sign in big bright lights telling them anyway. Really, I didn't have a sign in big bright lights. Most people I knew that are my age or older didn't have a sign with big bright lights. They found it because they did the work to find it. And I'm very much on that side. And so the third thing, this is going to be more controversial. The occult community has always been divided and had a dichotomy between the smart people on the one hand and the dumb people on the other. Now, exactly who's smart and who's dumb depends on who you ask, because a lot of people are like, people who think like me are smart, people who disagree with me are dumb. That's what you're going to hear. Well, that being said, a lot of the people who used the case spelling when I was coming up, it was Thelemites, who some are actually really solid. So I'm not going to make a universal condemnation or a universal condemnation, but with Thelemites, fluff bunnies, and retards. And a lot of Thelemites, amongst the people I came up with, Thelemites weren't looked on that well. It's only recently I've been reevaluating my opinion. And so what happened was I fell in with the crowd where the smart people do not use the K, and the mentality was the dumb people do. That's not the case anymore. The K spelling has become mainstreamed. A lot of smart people are using the K spelling. In fact, you see me quote Denning and Phillips a lot. I actually like their work. They use the K spelling. So what happens is, it's up to you. It's totally subjective. Go with whatever position you go with. I'm simply giving you mine. But anytime I see the K spelling, I cringe inside, because that's how I've been programmed. So use whatever spelling you want. I reserve the right to judge you silently if you do. That said, I'd like to move on. What is a definition of magic? Now we've talked about how to spell it. How do we define it? There are a lot of definitions. The definition I use is applied spiritual theology. Now, what is theology? Theology is classically defined by Anselm of Canterbury as faith seeking understanding, fides quaerens intellectum. So, and I believe it was Paul Tillich who put this in the form of rational inquiry into the contents of our faith. So what this translates into is, it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter if you're a theist, if you're an atheist, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Buddhist, if you're Catholic, if you're Protestant, if you're Mormon, if you're Flying Spaghetti Monster. It doesn't matter. Anytime you start thinking about what you believe, anytime you try to systematize or understand what you believe, you are doing theology. So let's get back to the term spiritual theology. Spiritual theology is kind of an overarching term. It covers our spiritual operations, our spiritual lives. Okay, now it's broken down into two categories. There's ascetic theology, from the word askesis, which means training. Ascetic theology talks about what are the things we do. How is it that we train in our spiritual life? How is it that we organize our spiritual practice? Mystical theology deals with what we experience. How is it that we may experience visions or hear voices? How is it that we may see blood coming out of a consecrated host? Or things that have happened to me personally. How is it that I may hear a woman's voice after I pray the rosary? It happens rarely, like once every few years, but it does happen. How is it that when I'm saying Mass to help heal somebody on their deathbed, that if the answer is no, the host will break right after I say the words of consecration? Wait, after the words of consecration in the Latin Mass, you genuflect, you lift the host up, you put it down on the corporal, a piece of white linen that's on the altar, genuflect again. When I do that second genuflection, and this happened to me twice now, the host broke without me touching it. That is something of a spiritual experience. Mystical theology gets into the how and the why, and most priests, at least prior to Vatican II, were required to study it. I would refer you to Arthur Devine's Manual of Mystical Theology. This was a seminary textbook written in the 1920s. I would refer you to this because it talks about how can a priest advise somebody who's experiencing these things, even if they're not experiencing it themselves. So the application of ascetic and mystical theology is magic. What makes it Catholic is that it's happening within the walls, the boundaries of Catholic dogmatic, moral, and scholastic theology. So don't let that word dogmatic scare you. Dogma is simply the official expression of an organization's belief system. So while theology is seeking understanding of your belief system, dogma is a group's official expression of their self-understanding. Okay, so and dogmatic theology, it's used as a signpost to help say, okay, am I off the beaten path? Am I on the right track? It's basically used as signposts. It's not used as something to clobber people over the head with. It's not used as something to burn people over the stake with. Well, if you're doing it right, it's not. Now, that's a tirade I'm not going to get into right now because that's a whole lot of dissension and controversy that I want to save for another time. All right, so that is the generality of what is Catholic occultism. And that's also generality of what is magic. So, who may practice Catholic occultism? Catholic occultism may be practiced by any baptized Catholic, whether a layperson, a cleric, a man, a woman, a child. In fact, I will go so far to say that any baptized person, whether Catholic or not, may practice this. Reason being, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself here, is baptism is the first initiation into the Catholic Church. Now, when a person is baptized, say, into a Protestant church, so long as they use water and say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, or words that are close enough to that formula. The words given in the Great Commission at the very end of Matthew. As long as it's happened, that is a Catholic baptism. Catholicism considers that to be a valid baptism, and it also considers it to be a Catholic baptism. The only thing that makes a person non-Catholic after that is the teaching that they receive and choose to believe. So it doesn't matter if you were baptized in a Baptist church or in a Presbyterian church, or if you're baptized in a Lutheran church. It doesn't matter because you still have that baptism, you still have that initiation into this current that powers Catholicism. Now, this raises the question, because a lot of people, they seem to think the priesthood is somehow superior to lay people. No, they're not. We're not, they're not, however you want to put it. The only thing that separates a priest from a lay person is the ability to quote-unquote, confect transubstantiation, i.e. consecrate the Eucharist, bring the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ down to earth under the appearances of bread and wine. Now, that's the only thing. As far as anything else I'm talking about, there's the ability to forgive sins and confession. As far as anything else I'm talking about, there is no ontological difference. There's no difference in essence. There's no difference in the soul of the person. So, no, a priest is not automatically superior to this than a lay person. In fact, I've seen very many pious lay people who are way better at Catholic magic than degenerate priests are. So, there's not an automatic difference. I actually talk about this in detail in Chapter 3 of the Magic of Catholicism, so I'm going to refer you there for the time being. Now, actually, I think I talk about that in the samples on the Fava website too. So, this class right now, this class is going to focus on the laity. All right. If I wanted to teach a class that was focusing on the priesthood, I would have said this class is for clergy only. But this class is not for clergy only. I want you to have things that you can walk out of here, and when you turn off your camera or turn off your computer or turn off your phone, I want you to be able to use the things that you hear in this class. I want you to be able to use them tonight if it applies to you. All right. So that's where we're going to focus. What are the elements of Catholic occultism? Now we start getting into some fun. The first element is theology. I'm focusing on traditional theology here, rather than modern theology. So the first element is theology because that's the framework in which it happens. Now I mentioned external and occult before. Right now I'm going to work on the words exoteric and esoteric. Exoteric refers to that which is without. Okay, exoteric refers to the things that you'll see. You go to the pews at church on a given Sunday. What you're going to see is exoteric. Okay, esoteric refers to that which is within. While the exoteric is like the walls of the house, it's the drywall, it's the paint job that's slapped on. The esoteric, those are the support beams holding the house together. That's the support beams, that's the framing that's behind the drywall. You know, it's the rafters that are underneath the shingles in the roof. That's what holds the house together. Without that, it falls apart. In fact, one of the problems after the 60s, and one of the problems in modern theology, be it conservative or liberal, is an extreme focus on the exoteric, practically ignoring the esoteric, and it's falling apart like a house of cards. And the people that are coming into the post-Vatican II church, they tend to be at stage 2. If we go back to Peck's stages of spirituality model, they're at stage 2, and they want the pay, pray, and obey. So they're going to conservative churches that focus on that. Or they're at stage 2, they think they're at stage 3, but they're actually stage 2, and they want the true faith depends only on social action, or true faith is rebellion for the sake of rebellion, so long as you do what we tell you. Rebel the way we tell you. So they're going to liberal churches that tell them that. So that's what you have. But without that focus on spirituality, without that focus on building up your private spiritual life, i.e. the contemplative life, which focuses on spirituality, the active life, which focuses on social and community action, without having both pillars, how's the house going to stand? This is why mystical theology says, you have the contemplative life, you have the active life. The contemplative life is superior to the active life, but the mixed life, which is doing both, is superior to either contemplative or active on its own. So ideally, you want to do both. Me, I'm not called to the active life. I openly admit that. I'm called to the contemplative life. Not everybody is called to do everything. So my hope here is, if you are socially inclined, if you are inclined to it, my hope here is to help you get the tools that will help refresh yourself spiritually, or help you get the tools that you can use magically that will help you while pursuing the active life. So while I'm not really called to social action, I'm not really a sociable person, I'm still not called not to help you. I'm called to help you in any way I can. So that is one of my hopes, that for those of you doing community work, I hope you'll get some tools that will help you to do that. And I also got off track, my apologies. But so one of the frameworks in Catholic occultism is theology. Another framework is the medieval scientific paradigm. This is where we find the 4 elements, the 7 planets, the 12 signs of the zodiac. This is where we find so much of what's been preserved in modern magic, even though you don't hear about it in modern Catholicism anymore. So we're going to talk about the theology. I mentioned just a few minutes ago that Catholic occultism uses traditional theology. The reason I say this, and this is Catholic occultism as I teach it, uses traditional theology. The reason I say it is this. Modern theology, it's very co-opted by ideologies that don't come from the theological matrix. Case in point, and conservative theology in my mind is every bit as bad as liberal theology. The left wing and the right wing both belong to the same bird. So when we talk about theology, what is the basis of Catholic theology? I've talked about this in so much detail in the Magic of Catholicism. In fact, the first few chapters, I have them available as a free sample PDF on the Thavma Pub website. I'm going to put a link to this in the description when the video uploads. So I explain most of it there. What I'm going to put in right here, though, is that the base root of the system I teach is called perichoresis. Perichoresis, it's a word that means circumcision. It refers to how the three persons of the Trinity, God 1 and 3 and 3 and 1, how the three persons of the Trinity operate in relation to each other and operate in relation to creation. What it says is that the Holy Ghost is the love of God the Father. God the Father transmits this love to the Son. The love of the Son is emptied out into the world. Emptied out into the world, the Holy Ghost processes throughout all creation, all the planets, all the galaxies, all the stars, maybe all the universes, I don't know, and then returns back to the source. Now what this does, this fills all creation with grace. And grace equals energy. This isn't talked about in the West, this is an Eastern concept that grace is the energy of God. Now whether this energy is created or uncreated, this is a debate between West and East. I'm not getting into this. The essence versus energy's distinction. What is that this energy, it's accessible to all of us. It's accessible to all of us, Catholics, non-Catholics alike. And when magicians talk about energy work, when New Agers talk about energy work, they're talking about the grace of God. Now, this is the basis of the system I teach. The basis of the sacraments, the sacramentals themselves, because they fit into this. These are the official expressions of this system. The sacraments are initiations or they're reinforcements of these initiations. The sacraments form the backbone of Catholicism's initiatory system. Now, there are three levels of initiation within Catholicism: baptism, confirmation, and ordination. Now, truth be told, I'm not really sure whether confirmation is a separate level of initiation. The theology says that all three of these sacraments, that they imprint an indelible character on the soul. They put a mark on the soul that cannot be removed and that you can't give it up no matter what. So, but in my experience, I'm not sure what a person who's been confirmed can do, spiritually or magically. What a person can do that a person who has been just baptized can do. I'm not sure what the difference is from a practical level. So, with that, it really looks like the difference in initiation is between baptism and ordination, where you have that mark on the soul that does allow for transubstantiation and absolution, the confecting the Eucharist and the forgiveness of sins. So, what's going on there? Now, ordination, so baptism is one level of initiation, ordination is another, and ordination can be divided up anywhere between 3 to 8 initiations depending on how you systematize it. For example, one way of systematizing it is the minor orders, the 4 minor orders, which are porter, lector, acolyte, exorcist, and then the 3 major orders, subdeacon, deacon, priesthood. But in 1947, in Sacramentum Ordinis, Pius XII said there are 3 orders of deacon, priest, and bishop. Of course, that's not something that Jesus came down and said that this is how it's going to be set up, so it's liable to human speculation. But again, everything I'm talking about in this class, this can be done from the initiation of baptism. So it doesn't matter if you're a priest, it doesn't matter if you're a layperson, it doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, Gnostic, or other, you will be able to do this. So, with theology, baptism, confirmation, ordination are your initiations. Penance is what cleanses you. Penance, going to confession, this is what cleans the soul. In fact, it's very interesting to point out that original Protestantism, when Luther, I won't say broke away from the church, because he didn't break away. He didn't break away when he nailed the 95 Theses to the door. He was kicked out 3 years later by a hierarchy that refused to listen to anything he had to say. So, when he ended up being kicked out and had no choice but to lead his own movement, when that happened, he said, penance is still a sacrament. Baptism, the Eucharist, and penance are sacraments. That's what he said. So penance is cleaning the soul. Going to confession, having absolution, it cleanses the soul. The Eucharist, It renews you. It empowers you spiritually. This is where you're ingesting the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. And in doing so, you're also ingesting Christ's power. This is why the old theologians would say that Jesus stays with you for about 15 minutes after you receive communion. I don't know how you can put a timestamp on it, but my own experience with it would say 15 minutes is pretty reasonable. It's a reasonable estimate, give or take a few minutes one way or the other. So there is empowerment that comes from the Blessed Sacrament. Now, outside of the 7 sacraments, we have sacramentals. A sacramental is like a minor sacrament. Sacramentals exist. These are things like holy water, scapulars, blessings, exorcisms, things that manifest God's energy, that grace, into your life on an actual level, and things that are intended to strengthen the individual believer's faith. Now, in the system I use and teach, magic is a sacramental. The reason it is a sacramental is that we're invoking God's, as Catholics or as Christians, we are invoking God's energy. We're seeking to manifest God's energy here on the physical plane. And when we see these things happen, how can we help but have our faith strengthened? I know one time, I think I talked about this in the last class on exorcism. I had a human exorcism case. I've talked about this before, 5 years ago. This was when I was in my borderline atheist phase. I was trying to be a good exoteric. I was trying to avoid this kind of stuff. Even though this is probably my first best calling, I was trying to avoid it so I could be, quote unquote, respectable. And traditional theology was not helping me keep my faith. Studying contemporary theology was really not helping me. If anything, it was helping me lose my faith faster. And then this exorcism case happened. When I conquered this thing that was inside of this person, my doubt was gone. My faith was back because I saw it manifest. Look, Jesus may tell us, do not go out looking for signs and wonders. And I'm not going to say go out looking for it, but we're human beings. Human beings need constant reassurance. Human beings need signs and wonders. Some of us need it more than others. So yes, this is a science of signs and wonders. There is nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong with it if you're saying signs and wonders are the only way I'm going to believe. There is something wrong with that. But there is nothing wrong with saying signs and wonders help me. I acknowledge I am the kind of person that needs this to help me along on my path. Nothing wrong with that in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, because what that is an exercise in self-honesty. So, with these things, and because we are only invoking the name of God, we are not talking with cacodemoniae, i.e. what most believers refer to as demons, evil spirits. Because we are not doing that. Because we are only speaking to God. We are only praying to and through Christ. We are talking with the Blessed Mother, the angels, the saints, the Church triumphant, and the souls in purgatory, the Church suffering. Because of that, this is where we are working what's called theurgy, God working, or God magic. We're working theurgy, and we're working acts of faith. Preferably also acts of hope and charity. This is what makes the magic I teach it. What qualifies magic I teach amongst the sacramentals, rather than as something else entirely. So, I want to move on from the theology because there's not a whole lot I can talk about detail in the theology inside of a 2-hour class. Can't really do that. In fact, I have to focus more on the content of the Magic of Catholicism or even Ritual Magic for Conservative Christians, where I do go into the theology in detail. In the next book I'm writing, I'm going to go into this in even more detail. I'm going to fill in the blanks, and I'm hoping to produce what will be a seminary level textbook. So I'm hoping to produce something that is at a more detailed level than what I put out already. And I'm really hoping to fill in a lot of blanks and answer a number of questions I've gotten over the years. So moving on from theology, I want to talk about science. What is the scientific pillar of the magic I teach? Well, what I'm working with stems from medieval Catholicism. So this is the medieval scientific worldview. That worldview is the 4 elements. That worldview is the 7 planets. That worldview is random empirical observations. In fact, most folk medicine. For example, there is a British herbal that has this remedy from like the 1000s. It talks about onion and garlic and a whole bunch of other ingredients. I'm going to need to find the link to this and put it in the description. And it was basically a cure-all, cure everything. Well, what was it, like 10 years ago, I came across an article where scientists examined the chemical properties of this remedy, and they said, yes, it will work. Because of the germicidal properties in onion and garlic, the germicidal properties of the other ingredients that were used. And so this is random empirical observation. Even if germ theory hadn't existed yet, they were still paying attention to when you do action A or mix ingredients together, then result happens, and we can reproduce this. So medieval science had a little bit of that. It also believed that the revolutions of the 7 planets could have some effect on what happens here on Earth below. The 4 elements, which were aligned with the 4 humors, the 4 seasons of the year. In fact, there are even hints at the states of matter. Once the state of plasma was discovered, the analogy was complete. It was the Western organization is earth, water, air, fire. Solid, liquid, gas, plasma. And so these were considered to have to do with the balance of matter, because matter was composed of these elements in varying degrees. So that's medieval science in a nutshell. And for about up to 1800 years, 17 to 1800 years, the vast majority of Christian history, Christians thought along these lines. In fact, it was not just a Christian thing. Pagans thought from these lines. Empedocles, Ptolemy, and so forth. Aristotle. Right, pagans thought along these lines. Muslims thought along these lines. Right, Al-Biruni's treatise on astrology, which is actually pretty interesting, because he even assigns the planets to different religions. So Muslims used the scientific model. Jews used the scientific model. In fact, any overlap between what I'm talking about here and things you might find on the Tree of Life and the 10 Sephiros, what I'm talking about, it has to do with this common ground. Just like Jews and Christians and Jews, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and so on, and Hindus today, we have evolution and the Big Bang and the periodic table in common. Science is ecumenical. In both scientific models were ecumenical, nigh interfaith. Medieval science was interfaith just as modern science is. It's not the property of any religion. So I want you to keep that in mind. This is why I think medieval magic, it relies on Muslim sources, it relies on Hebrew sources, because it works, because it's working with the scientific content that's in there, more so than the religious content. That's the common ground and the common language. So, how are we going to talk about this? I want to start by talking about the elements. All matter is seen as being composed of the 4 elements. Now, from Empedocles onwards, the Greeks saw 4 elements. Aristotle saw a 5th element. Right, fire, water, earth, air. Aristotle saw a 5th element, which would be spirit or ether. Now, outside the Aristotelian school, the 5th element didn't really catch on. So I'm not going to work with that. Okay, the elements were connected. Okay, the elements were connected to the 4 basic colors of Greek painting. They were also likewise connected with the four temperaments and the 4 humors that were seen to be in the body. For example, air was connected with blood, and therefore the color red. Fire was connected with choler or yellow bile, and the color yellow. Air, fire. Water was connected with phlegm, and either the color was either white or green, and the phlegmatic temperament. Okay, either white or green. And in the Isidorian system that I use and teach, I make like a whitish green. I base it off of mucus because that's what we usually mean when we say phlegm, but that's not what the ancients meant by that word. Okay, and then earth, which is melancholia or black bile. The color was black. Each of these had to do with the temperament as well. I recommend reading the Four Temperaments by Conrad Hock, which was written in 1934, just to show how far the theory of the temperaments has persisted in the Christian worldview. So I'm not talking about things that were ignored or discarded like the minute Jesus walked the earth and said, "I bring you a new covenant." I'm talking about things that were held on to up until 300 years ago at most, 150 years ago at the very least, and that were still being written about well into the 20th century in Christian authorship. So, we're drawing from a very rich tradition. Okay, so with the planets, it's the seven classical planets. Really, above the earth, they were seen as being spheres. Above the earth, in fact, here we go. I need to get back to learning how to share screens again. There. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see the screen? Okay. This comes from, this is the Christian Aristotelian cosmos from Peter Appian's Cosmographia, dated 1524. So what we see here, this is a diagram of the planets and the seven heavens above the earth. Okay, in the center we have the earth. And these are the spheres of the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Above this we have the seven heavens of the seven planets. Okay, the first heaven is the moon. The second is Mercury. The third is Venus. The fourth is the sun. The fifth is Mars. The sixth is Jupiter. And the seventh is Saturn. Now above that there's an eighth heaven. Octavum firmamentum is what it says. Now some of you might notice that the letter U has a line over it that's called a macron. In classical Latin, that means to pronounce it double length, like you'd pronounce a long vowel in Japanese. Excuse me, I'm recording this video on a phone and somebody keeps calling me. Okay, in later Latin, that line over vowel means you put either an M or an N after it, so it's nonum caelum. Okay, so the eighth heaven is the firmament. Okay, it's the firmament, the sphere of fixed stars. It's the sphere of the zodiac. Now, this has a ninth heaven, the crystalline heaven. If you're familiar with D&D, this would be the crystal sphere that you find in the Spelljammer campaigns. If you're familiar with sci-fi, this would be more like a Dyson sphere, which is built around a star and built around a solar system in order to harvest more energy from that system's sun. All right, that's what that crystalline sphere is. Now, in Dante's work, which is where I actually based my system off of, in Dante's work, the crystal sphere is actually identical with the primum mobile, the first movable, or to put it in a more usable English phrase, the first movable thing. The primum mobile, that's God puts his hand on that, he moves that sphere, it moves around, and whatever it is he wills comes into being and manifests its way through the heavens onto the physical plane. And above that you have the imperial heaven, the Caelum imperium habitacurum Dei et omnium electorum, which is what this says. The imperial heaven, the habitation of God and of all the elect. All right, so that's the general diagram that medieval Catholicism used for the universe, for the planets, and for causation. And it was believed that planets can cause things to happen. For example, in the Summa Contra Gentiles, St. Thomas Aquinas says that a celestial body, i.e. a planet, is capable of causing change without there being an element involved. The example he gives is the sun is capable of heating up water without fire. So what we have is that there is an interplay between planets. There is an interplay between the planets and the physical plane and the various heavens and spheres which they represent. All right. Now, what these planets are used for, that's been preserved in most modern magic outside of Catholicism. So I don't feel the need to go into this into too much detail in the course of this particular class, because there's so much information on that you can go forth and make it happen. Now, something I am going to show you right here, something else I'm going to show you is, let me share another window. Okay, now this is the diagram of the 7 planets and the 7 heavens from Dante's Paradiso. Now the system that I use and teach is based on this right here. Now the first thing I want to show you is, that the crystal heaven, the crystalline heaven, is one and the same with the prima mobile. Okay, that's heaven number 9. So instead of the 11 heavens that you saw in the previous diagram, you have 10 heavens. Number 9 and the 10th is the Empyrean heaven, right here. Okay, now each of the planets, and I see the elements are right here again. Earth, air, water, air, fire. So you see each of the elements again, in that order. Solid, liquid, gas, plasma. And then you see the planets, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, and so forth. Now, with each of these planetary spheres, you also have an attribution of one of the 9 orders of angels. Okay, the order of angels is with the moon. The order of archangels is with Mercury. The principalities are Venus. The powers are the sun. The virtues are Mars. The dominations are Jupiter. The thrones are Saturn. The cherubim are the sphere-fixed stars, or the 12 signs of the zodiac. And the seraphim are the prima mobile, the first movable thing. Okay, so the orders of angels are invoked with the function of each planet or of each sphere. So that's the one thing. Now, you also have what's attributed to each of these planets. Now, we know the moon is dreams. I would also say luck or games of chance. Now, I think the Greater Key of Solomon attributes that either to Venus or Mercury, but I would attribute this to the moon. And I'm not the first, because poem 17 of the Carmina Burana, medieval poetry, it starts, O fortune, how like the moon, variable in state. O fortuna velut luna statu variabilis. When somebody says Carmina Burana and you hear the music, that's the song that you're hearing. Which, if somebody just sings the words without music, nobody recognizes it, so I'm not going to. Mercury is knowledge and fame and health and so on. The functions of the planets are represented as they are in astrology. They're represented as they are in modern magic, as they are in Western magic in general. Another interesting thing is how the planets are associated with the virtues, or those who couldn't apply them. For example, the moon is associated, the heaven of the moon is associated with people who they made vows, but they weren't able to keep their vows. They weren't able to keep them consistently. But they weren't bad enough. They weren't bad enough to go to hell, and they didn't qualify for purgatory, so they were put in the lowest heaven. In the heaven of Mercury, you have the people who, well, they did it for fame. They did it for glory. They did it to make their name. An example of somebody put in there is Justinian. Okay. In Venus we have spirits of lovers, spiriti amanti. Okay, and Charles Martel is mentioned as one of the people in there. In the sun, spiriti sapienti, the spirits of wise people. And the people we have, Saint Isidore, from whom the Isidorian system is named. Right, Isidoro-Alighieran comes from Saint Isidore of Seville and Dante Alighieri. Okay, Saint Bede. Right, Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus. You know, people who are known for being wise. Solomon, Peter Lombard. Dionysius the Areopagite. I've always had a hard time pronouncing that. Okay, and with right, the heaven of Mars, Spiriti Militanti, warriors. Saint Bonaventure, Saint Augustine, warriors for the faith. And I can go through this. Wait. I can go through this, and in the next book I will. It is systematized. Each of the planets has a function. Each of the planets, they're associated with different functions, different choirs of angels. They're associated with the classical education, which would be the trivium of grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, the quadrivium of mathematics, music, geometry, astrology, and the zodiac, the prima mobile, and the empyrean heaven. They're associated with the three branches of philosophy: natural philosophy, moral science, and divine science. So we actually, it's a very complete system that we're working with here. And I'm very happy with this being a complete system. I'm very happy that this is so completely within Catholicism. Because this is the thing. When I'm writing about theological magic, it's like, I felt like I was missing something by not addressing the elements and the planets. I really felt like I was missing something, but I couldn't fit it into quote-unquote official theology. And then I found that when I stumbled upon medieval authorship and what the medievals were actually saying and how they thought, this is Catholic. This is not now it's superstition to believe this as actual fact, but it is not superstitious to make this as a model on which to build your hypothetical practice. And so when we work this as hypothetical practice, we're as a model on which to base our practice, we're actually good to go. Just don't posit this as actual determined fact, and that's what saves you from the charge of superstition. So, with this explanation, I want to move on from theory. And I want to move into practice. Okay, what is the first step in Catholic occultism? The first step is to be a good Catholic. Okay, if you're not a Catholic, like if you're Baptist or if you're Episcopalian, the first step is to know God, to serve God, and to love God in the best way that you know how. And in so doing, what you're seeking to do is to activate that mark that was put on your soul at your baptism. You're seeking to activate it, and you're seeking to look into it as a two-way conduit. Because that mark is a channel. It makes you a channel for divine power to come through you. The thing is, you have to activate it. This is the works part of faith and works. This isn't just about salvation. This is about sanctification. Growing in holiness, which also means growing in energy. So you're activating. So what you're doing is you're interacting with, I shouldn't say activating, you're interacting with that mark that was put on your soul in baptism. You're interacting with it and you're saying, I want to make the most out of what I was given. I want to be that candle that was given to me after water was poured on my head. I want to be that bright light. Right, the powers and all that, it's a side effect of a vibrant spirituality. Pursue the vibrant spirituality first. That's what we're going with here. So, be a good wherever you are. Every part of the practice as I teach it is designed to look inconspicuous to outsiders. Why? Because occult means hidden. It doesn't mean out in the open where everybody can see you. The same issue I have with putting a K at the end of the word magic is the same issue that I have with putting your practices out there for everybody to see. And I know I'm probably a hypocrite for saying that, seeing what I'm doing right here on a damn camera. I saw that. I saw that facial expression. So what is it? You start with daily practice. Daily practice is composed of three things. The first thing is observing the moral teaching to the best of your ability. Now, I don't want to nitpick and get into specific moral teaching, specific moral quibbles and conundrums. What I'm going to do with that is I'm going to tell you to go consult your priest or your minister for advice on that. Okay. I don't want to get into that. What I do want to get into is that live your morality to the best you can and be consistent with it. Be the best person you can be, because that's your connection to the physical plane. If what we're doing involves manifestation on the physical, then we need to connect with the physical. That also means physical exercise. You don't have to pump iron. You don't have to be at the gym for 10 hours a day or run 50 miles or whatever. But even just go for a walk for half an hour. Just something where you're using your physical body. Go for a walk, ride a bike, just do like 10 push-ups in the morning or something. Connect yourself to your physical body. Be in your body. And take care of your body, because the body is a temple. Now, the physical is the one thing. The other pillars are prayer and meditation, which St. Teresa of Avila tells us should be one and the same, because we're hypocritical if we're not thinking about the words as we're saying them. Now, prayer is pretty obvious. Prayer is conversation with God. It's just conversation. It's not worship, it's conversation. This is why we have prayer to Mary. This is why we have prayer to the saints, prayer to the angels, because we're not worshiping them. We are conversing with them. This is the distinction that Calvin arbitrarily decided to reject when he wrote the Institutes. That's why a lot of people in the Reformed traditions don't get that distinction, because they come from a tradition where one of the primogenitors said, I arbitrarily reject this because I don't feel like it. Nah. That said, prayer is just conversation. Worship is different. So, what are the core parts of prayer? Morning and evening prayer. The Abramelin Method does this. Many spiritual directors say to do this. The Autumn Solis curriculum talks about a morning and evening adoration. Morning and evening prayer. This connects you with the current. This connects you with the power source, i.e. God, i.e. the triune God with whom we're seeking to connect and whom we're seeking to represent, and whose power we're seeking to manifest on this plane. Prayer. Now, prayer can be extempore. It could be the daily magical exercises, the daily magical devotions, that I have on the website, which I'm working on rewriting into a stronger form. It could be the rosary. For me, it's prayer morning, evening, rosary, sometime around noon or as close as my schedule will allow that day. Okay. And this is to get you in there. Now, the rosary, it's to get, that connects you with virtue. The 15 mysteries of the traditional rosary, that's my tree of life. Each one is connected with a spiritual fruit, which is a virtue. Each one is connected with the ladder of spiritual progress, which it is. It is Jacob's ladder. A garden of roses instead of pomegranates. Now, so we do this. There's something I call the Theurgic Rosary. I'm going to do a set of broadcasts, hopefully next week, where I go through all 15 mysteries, 5 per day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'm going to do a set of broadcasts because I want you to see this. That's easier to explain that way. But what that is, it's the expanded method that I give in how to pray the rosary and get results, but it includes further meditation on what the fruit is, how the fruit applies to us, and why we are seeking to develop this fruit, in order to develop it more within us. I'm sorry if you hear a dog barking outside. I've got a window open, so there are noises coming in from outside. Now, weekly, attend Mass regularly if possible. The reason for this is, I mentioned before, confession is cleansing and receiving communion is empowering. You want to get into that cleansing and empowering on a regular routine. All right, attend regularly as much as possible. Now, if you're a priest, say Mass as often as you're obligated to. At least. If you have a congregation, that's once a week and on days of obligation. If you don't have a congregation, then you're obliged to say Mass at least 3 or 4 times a year. Do it at least as often, and keep up on your daily disciplines. If you want to augment it with the LBRP, for example, which I do morning and evening before and after my daily exercises, you can do that as well. I'm going to do a write-up of the version I use. I put the angels in different directions because the Isidoro-Alighieran system has the elements in different directions. north is fire, east is air, south is water, west is earth. Now, you can use whatever setup you want, because there are different ways of attributing elements to directions if you go through history. What I'm going with is what's dominant within medieval literature, but you don't have to use that. Just use whatever system you think makes sense. As far as I'm concerned, the Golden Dawn system, it makes perfect sense just as much as the Isidoro-Alighieran system does. So that's your choice. But at least once a week also, meditate on the elements. Do what's called a path working on the elements, where in your mind you have a door in front of you that represents the element, like a symbol of that element. You walk through that door in your mind, and you'll find a landscape. It's personalized to you. It's not necessarily what I see when I go in there. It's not necessarily what, say, Raphael describes in his art and practice of astral projection, with the tropical trees for fire, the waterfalls for water. I know my experience is nothing like that. But just go in there and observe. This is happening all in your head. So converse with whatever may come up to you, but recognize that it's all in your head. Do not allow that to be another entity. It's important because other entities can use that to link to you if you don't make that wall of separation. And then do that for a few minutes, as long as your concentration will allow, and then come back through the door, and then just come back through the doorway. Okay, that's meditation. It's very similar to the Golden Dawn's Tattva exercises, except I'm not using the Tattva symbols. You can create a symbol of the element that works for you if you want. You can create a symbol. You can use a standard symbol like the triangles with lines through them that we find in modern magic. Do whatever works for you. You can even use symbols from anime for all it matters for this. You can personalize this. I personally would not, but if it works for you, I'm not going to take an issue if you do. Okay, so do that once a week or at least once every 3 days. Do it in the order of earth, water, air, fire, and then work your way back down. Okay, so with that said, that's pretty much the daily and the weekly exercises. And that's pretty much it. What we're going to talk about now are, because I was in a consult, a few weeks ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and she asked me about benchmarks. Like, what kind of benchmarks will you know to measure your progress? Now, the first one, there are a number of benchmarks that you'll find within the first few months. Now, the first one is kind of uncomfortable for me to talk about, because it's not that I'm uncomfortable talking about sex. I am uncomfortable talking about it in relation to me. But one of the first benchmarks I noticed a week or two into my daily practice was losing sex drive. And this totally scared me. It's not like I have a sex life or anything like that, but not having that drive, not having that interest, it scares me because, I'm as much a man as anybody else. It's very easy to conflate one's sexuality with one's humanity. In fact, about 16 years ago, Hugh Hefner said that in an interview with Gene Simmons. To deny your sexuality is to deny your humanity. It was in the first issue of Gene Simmons' Tongue magazine. So, it is interesting because somewhere in my subconscious, I do make that connection. A lot of people do. So, you need to be ready for that to happen, especially if you have a high sex drive. But what that does, once you get past the fear that engenders in you, it frees you up to embrace your spirituality further without the temptation of wanting to go to a bar or find somebody, or wanting to, do other things involving yourself, or whatever, depending on what your situation in life is. On acting that way, it frees you up. It frees you to pursue your spirituality. So it is a good benchmark. It can be disconcerting if you're used to your body reacting in certain ways, but it's very liberating once you get used to it. Now, that's not the most universal benchmark, but it is consistent across people I've worked with. I'd say about 95% of people that I've worked with, 95% of people I've brought through from the ground up, that is a consistent first benchmark. Now, a few weeks after the elemental meditations, I started to experience clairvoyance. It was kind of wonky. It was off and on. It took a few more weeks before it became steady, and I noticed that if you stop the meditations, you will lose it. Or at least I did, but I'm also not very right-brained at all. So for me, I probably needed that constant reinforcement. There are people who will keep it after they stop the meditations, and others where they'll keep it, but it just won't be as good. Okay, now anywhere from a week to 3 months out, one thing I noticed was an increased energy, an increased focus, and an increased willpower. So that's something else to look out for. Again, that's not universal. This is just something I'm noticing in aggregate. These are the benchmarks to look for. Okay, as you go from there, it works its way up, it works its way out. But those are the beginning benchmarks to notice. So from there, I've talked about dailies, I've talked about benchmarks to notice. I want to talk practical techniques now. Practical technique also centers around prayer. And there are 7 keys to effective prayer. I talk about this in my new Everyday Prayerbook that's available for free on the Thopmopub website. So I'm going to refer to you there. I talk about it in the Magic of Effective Prayer also. So I'm going to refer you to there, but the basic keys, they start with love for God, love for self, and love for neighbor. Now, when I define love, I'm not talking about some mushy, gushy, fluffy love and light thing. I'm talking about understanding. I'm talking about lack of negativity. That's what I mean when I'm talking about love. Because you don't really love somebody if you don't really understand them, because you're letting some part of you get in the way of that understanding. So, when you love God, you're acknowledging that there is a connection between you and God. It's a vertical connection. You're establishing that there is a power current that flows both ways. This is where perichoresis comes in. Now, when you love yourself, you're acknowledging that you are a worthy recipient of that power and a worthy channel for that power. And when you love your neighbor, you're loving horizontally. This acknowledges that your neighbor is also created in the image of God. So are you. And you're acknowledging that this power circles throughout the entire universe, or the universes. I don't know what theory you subscribe to. And in so doing, you're making yourself consciously aware, and you are tuning your subconscious to this energy so that you can call upon it and use it. So in prayer, these 3 keys are vitally important. The next key is the attitude of gratitude, because in loving God, you're acknowledging that there is a two-way current. But still, this is the energy coming to you. In giving thanks, you're sending the energy back. In Luke, there is an episode where Jesus talks about Jesus heals 10 lepers, and only 1 comes back. He says, "What happened to the other 9? Because you came back to give thanks, you were healed." So that gratitude is very important, that attitude of gratitude. The 5th is to visualize, to actualize. What this is doing is you're engaging more of your senses, you're engaging more of your brain, you're engaging more of yourself into manifesting this current when you visualize. The more of your senses that you engage, the better a result you can get. Because we weren't created as solely spiritual creatures. We weren't created as solely mental creatures. We weren't created as solely physical creatures. We were created as all of the above. So use all of the above. The 6th key is called the sphere of availability. Now, this is where a lot of what the law of attraction teachers teach comes up right against stark reality. You can only manifest that which is currently available in your sphere. Now, that's not 100% true. There's one guy on my friends list that he mentioned one night he was hungry. He didn't exactly have access to pizza, but delivery boy knocked on his door and said, "Hey, I'm tired of delivering to the wrong address. Do you want this pizza?" He got free pizza out of the deal. However, that was in his sphere of availability because there was a frustrated delivery driver in the area. He just wasn't aware of it. So sphere of availability, it's a really weird thing. I need another class to talk about it in detail. In fact, I will. Next month, I'm going to talk about the 7 keys of effective prayer in detail. So stay tuned. But the sphere of availability is something you want to work to expand, be aware of, and expand, and constantly expand. All right. And the last one is ain't nothing to it but to do it. It's one thing to pray. It's one thing to do ritual. But action is also very important. There are teachers who say you don't need to act. The fact is, what you work on the spiritual needs a channel to manifest into the physical. You can even be looking for a job. You might want your dream job. You may apply for your dream job, but you might have to do like a more menial job before you get that dream job. And it's funny because you're doing action towards getting a job. It can help you get that dream job. I've actually had that happen before. I'll share that story next month. So those are the 7 keys. And prayer is a vital key to all other techniques because it's that prayer which is where you're calling down the divine energy. A funny thing in Isidoro-Alighieran's The Golden Dawn, when he talks about the conjurations used by the order, he admits that he changed them. And he said the conjurations used by the order resemble ordinary prayers, and for reasons I don't want to go into, they don't suit me. I'll look through my copy and get you the exact page number when I upload this video, because that's pretty important. So this is not just a Catholic thing. This is not just a Christian thing. The original Hermetic order big Hermetic order of modern occultism did the exact same thing that I'm talking about here. Now, I mentioned before communication with spirits, i.e. what spirits you call on, what order of angels are based off of the planetary correspondences. That's not necessary, but it's a useful system for categorization, and it really helps to get things done. It works for me, it's worked for countless other people. I'm not going to fix something that's not broke. Another interesting thing is music can be selected according to the mode. There's something called mode, which is basically your 8 Gregorian modes or planetary correspondence. If you know anything about me, I like my services musical. When magicians have vibrating names, I prefer to use the chant modes, which I want to do a separate class on this, but the basic way to do this, all right? I have sheet music for the 8 Gregorian modes in my new Everyday Prayerbook right here, and it's on page... Right, you can get this for free, so I'm not trying to sell you something here. It's on page 100. Now, the way to do this is, the way to organize this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Mode 1 is the sun. Mode 2 is the moon. Mode 3 is Mars. Mode 4 is Wednesday, is Mercury. Mode 5 is Jupiter. Okay, mode 5 is Thursday is Jupiter. Mode 6 is Venus. Mode 7 is Saturn. I'm doing this by the days of the week associated with the planets. Now, mode 8 is the sphere of fixed stars. Okay, I'm going to do that in another class because that actually needs a lot more extrapolation. But what we have here are basic techniques, a basic working system that if I had another 2 hours, I would go into this. I'm going to do a First Steps in Occult Catholicism Part 2 class. I'm going to do that because I want to go into more detail. But I'm looking at this, and we've been at this for a while now. So I'm going to go into some more detail in a future class. And I definitely want to go into fleshed out ritual. I want to go into actual musical use. Right now, go through a Gregorian chant hymnal and just look at the mode numbers. Okay? It's like a 75% correspondence between the subject of the hymn and the planet itself. So I'm going to go into that later. But right now, I want to recap a little bit. Because we've talked about what is theology, whether magic, how magic is spelled even, the definition of magic, the place of the planets, the elements, the angels, the archangels in the system, basic practices, benchmarks for practice, and practical techniques. So we've talked about that. What I would encourage you to do as you leave here tonight, I would encourage you to pray. I would encourage you to start like a daily system if you're not doing it already. Daily and nightly, as close to sunrise and sunset as your schedule will allow, or some other situation as your schedule allows. Just start with prayer. That's how it begins. Attend services regularly if you're in a place where you can, because that can be tricky depending on where you stand on certain things and what churches are around you. But be the best person you can be, and read, study, spiritual work. Start with the Bible. Start with the Bible. Work your way into theology. Work your way into spiritual authors. The Imitation of Christ is a great starting point. For theology, the book I usually recommend is Charles Coppen's A Systematic Study of the Catholic Religion. It's not perfect. It's perfect from an esoteric standpoint. From an esoteric standpoint, it could use some work, but it's the best that I can work with right now. The best that I found right now. So I'm going to encourage that. And right now, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions. Does anybody have some questions about what's been covered in the class? Going once, going twice. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, since I'm not getting any questions, I'm going to close the class down. I wish everybody a good night, and may Almighty God bless each and every one of you. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.